we'll get started for the day. Well, I'm filling in for Dr. Ismail for this lecture next. And so I'll get to talk about proximate analysis and start off in moisture determination in the gym. So we'll have a go at this. So, well, you know where to find me. I'm very close to Dr. Ismail's office. If something doesn't make sense, give a holler, stop in. So we will talk about proximate analysis. It's a set of analyses, so kind of a suite, if you want to think of it, that's suited for a certain purpose. And so basically it's to fill in the label. That's the largest obligation. Provide the information that goes on the label of a food product. So when they call proximate, so that's, I guess, what it is. That's its purpose, filled in there. How is it done? Obviously, you're going to be, if you think about a label on a can or on a product, it lists things like fat content, protein content, type of fat. Doesn't give you moisture, but it gives you ash and some things along those lines. And so we'll go into the methodologies that are used to collect these type of data. And a little bit about errors to consider in the methodologies. And so let's have a go with this. General methods, they are what I would call general methods. They're used to give you, Dr. Ismail had crude, I wouldn't be quite so unkind, but he calls them crude because they're really not overly sensitive. They're not the height of analytical precision, but they give the accuracy that you need. It measures what you want to know, and it gives you the accuracy you need for it. And so to meet label requirements. There really could be, like I say, many other choices in terms of analytical methodology, but there's a set of standard methods. So when we talk about moisture determination, it'll tend to be done in one or two ways. Do protein, it might be one, well, primarily one day, could be another, but we're going to limit those methodologies. So they're standardized methodologies and everybody uses them. So when you get a label declaration, whether it's a small company, a big company, that product or that product, they're done in the same methodology, the same approaches. And so, what is this is the label. And Dr. Ismail's kind of blanked out the part that I could ask you about. For example, what components are listed that are blocked out here? I assume you're all label readers, aren't you? You don't eat anything without reading the label. But
sodium's next. I want to say cholesterol, total carbohydrates.
One more.
Protein.
Sugars,
added sugar.
Well, protein's the main one we're looking for. Sure. And so, why are these materials listed? There's a lot of argument about them. Certainly the materials that are listed on the label have changed over time. At one time, people weren't really worried about saturated fats or unsaturated fats. And so there wasn't really a distinguishing in those. There's a couple other areas that simply, as the customer or consumer becomes more interested, but some things are important, you'll find that label changes and then the methodology changes. So this does fat fill this in? So saturated fat, trans fat, people weren't interested in one time. It used to be just total fat. Now we get those, cholesterol goes in there, sodium, total carbohydrate. We're interested in dietary fiber, so that's shown up on the label. The idea of added sugars, some people are sensitive and say, hey, I don't want to eat sugar. I'm trying to cut down on such things. And so again, let's say this is changed over time. And the way the data are accumulated, we basically end up getting 100% of the composition of the food by proximate analysis. The percent moisture, percent ash, percent fat, percent protein, and percent total carbohydrates. All of these methodologies, for math, ash, fat, protein, so on, get combined into this equation and give you then a total composition of the product. If you kind of look at this, the ash is not listed on the label. Carbohydrates are. Moisture isn't on the label as well. The moisture is less of an issue in the sense that people aren't really concerned about the moisture content unless they're thinking about, what did I just buy? 99% water? 99% water, maybe they'd be concerned about it. But in general, it's not a health issue. It's not something that people are really concerned about. It's percent moisture for the most part. And so in proximate analysis, then you still measure it, and you still measure ash, which again is listed here. So a couple of additions: the fat, protein, carbohydrates, the taken care of by this methodology and end up in this table. The idea was, why are they listed in proximate analysis? Why are they part of proximate analysis if they aren't listed anywhere? And the problem comes in that when you do this kind of analysis, one of the things that you want to put on the label, you need to put on the label one way or another, fractions, sugars, carbohydrates, is that the methodologies to determine carbohydrates, not even say methodologies, maybe that's not right, but the number and type of carbohydrates can be very broad. You can have simple sugars, you have disaccharides, you can have oligosaccharides, can all kinds of different carbohydrates, more complex carbohydrates, and there isn't a simple method for it. And so you don't have an easy way to do carbohydrates. And so what's basically, if we do in the methodology, we measure everything else. If we consider moisture, ash, fat, protein, the only thing that's left and not accounted for is carbohydrates. So they can be done by difference, essentially. And then that gives you data to put up for carbohydrates. And so, again, kind of listed here, there are official methods I'll talk about. Some of these methods aren't like this. The John Soxel, I'll mention in a while, really aren't done for labeling purposes. What you'll do is you'll do a different approach for fat. And you did do fatty acid analysis, right, by gas chromatography? You looked at the general composition of fatty acids from C4 all the way up to what, C20 maybe, something like that, certainly C through 18, C18. And so when you did the fat, you looked at individual fatty acids. And so you've got a determination here by fatty acids that replaces the Soxhlet and the John for this particular purpose. These are used if somebody wants to know total fat, not for labeling purposes. You will use these methodologies, but for fat, you'll use a different methodology for labeling purposes. And so, like I say, total carbohydrates are calculated by difference. There is no measure to get to the broad range of carbohydrates that occur in foods. You must use official methods. You're not free to choose anything you want to do. In terms of each of these methodologies, there are official approved methodologies. So everybody's getting the same information. They're getting it by the same techniques or methodologies. Why? These methods have been tested across laboratories and across products. They're very broadly used and very broadly applicable. And so this suite of methods is largely fixed in choices. If you're looking for moisture content, most commonly would be oven drying methodologies. And I should have looked and seen how many of these things you've done. Have you done moisture determination? Not yet? Okay. I expect oven drying will be one of the methodologies that you use. Dry ashing, yes or no? No? Okay. Fat, you've done fatty acids. Have you done fat totally by Soxhlet for John here? Okay. That'd be a whole lesson semester, right? Okay. Like I say, these can be used, except they're not for total fat. Protein, Dumas, and Feldal, which you will do or have done in the laboratory. And then, like I say, if you done all the rest, you get total carbohydrates by difference. So these are the preferred methodologies: oven drying, dry ashing. In fact, it's done by fatty acids, but I'll give you a little more detail on that. And okay,
Is Soxhlet and Majani like one method or are
they're two different methodologies.
same thing with Dumas and Shallow?
The Dumas and Keldol, very different methodologies.
Okay.
Yep. Soxhlet is basically you put the food, you grind it up, you put it in a holder, a nice forest fiber holder, and then you distill ether up, let the ether drop through it and recycle. So you continuously use distilled ether to extract the fat out and gets collected in a bottom flask. For Majani, that's used largely for dairy products. And there again, they've actually got Majani flasks that are made for it with a solvent extraction. So they're both solvent extractions. But what the fat we're worried about isn't necessarily what's extracted in that matter. So we can't use, so that's where we use the fatty acids themselves. Dumas, that's a fairly sophisticated. In both cases, they're determining nitrogen. But nitrogen is found from things other than protein. Nitrogen is not only found here or found in other food constituents. Nevertheless, we kind of assume that the nitrogen is a good indicator, primarily comes from protein. And so both of these measure nitrogen. Dumas is basically combustion. And kind of heated up hot enough, it just decomposes, gets into a gas like nitrogen gas, and it's measured in the equivalent of a gas chromatograph. But gas chromatograph only measures one thing: nitrogen that comes off that sample. And the Caldols, again, a different process that's not heated to break down the protein to nitrogen. It goes in concentrated sulfuric acid. You literally just digest it and then distill over the nitrogen, collect it and titrate it. So again, very different methodologies that get used. In lab, if you were working down in Dr. Roosevelt lab and one of the other labs, you may well be using Soxhlet or Majani. That's, like I say, very, very common methodologies. And like I said, we basically have to do it for labeling purposes by gas chromatography. It says FAME over there, fatty acid methyl esters, if you weren't aware of what that is. Fatty acids are very, very polar. They don't go work very well by gas chromatography. Get peaks that kind of go like that. They're ugly. We don't like ugly peaks. We like things that go up and down. That way, here's when it started, went up to here, it came back down to here. You can get really good area measurements, good detail by gas chromatography that you can't by some other techniques. And basically, if you're doing this business for labeling purposes, you look for butyric acid, C4, through the C24 fatty acids. So you'll get peaks for each of these fatty acids. The good thing is, of course, you get a butyric, caprylic, and so on, these acids, but you also get the unsaturation with them. And so you can get a lake, linolenic. And so if you would do Soxhlet or you would do other method, you get your solvent extractable. Okay, this gives you exactly what you want to measure. It gives you the fatty acids that you're interested in. Are they saturated, unsaturated, and so on. So that's there's a good reason for why it's done. Of course, we get the pieces, then you put those pieces together and say it had to come from this amount of lipid. So that's how it works. So you break the lipid down, analyze the parts, put it back together, and you can do a calculation for the amount of saturated fat, unsaturated fat, trans or non-trans fat. All of that comes from using the specificity of gas chromatography in this particular methodology. Again, there are many ways to determine carbohydrates or fractions thereof. But But like I say, that gets really very complicated if you want to get total carbohydrates because of the diversity of these sugars or carbohydrates, I suppose I should call them. And so, yes, we measure everything else, moisture, ash, fat, protein, subtracted from 100, and that gives us carbohydrates. We assume that everything's left is carbohydrate. Now, this is one that's obviously I'm working from Dr. Ismail's slides. And so she does have a couple questions for you. This is one question. And so you've got to meditate on that for a moment. And someone can comment which one of these is correct. Or do you like answer? I'm sorry, do you like answer D, E, F, G, or H? She gave you lots of options. Anybody want to offer? None of the above, absolutely. Moisture contact and water content, water activity are interchangeable. No, they're not. They measure very, very different things. The moisture content doesn't tell you if that's bound, that moisture's bound to things, other sugars, for example, very commonly, or whether that moisture is free. And it's really important if that moisture is free or if it's bound. If it's bound, it's not a good solvent. It doesn't work well in many cases to foster chemical reactions, product deterioration. And so they are very, very different. They both measure water in a sense. This measures the moisture content, the water in food. Water activity measures the water in the air above the food. So it's kind of, there's the water in food, but is that free? Is it free to leave or not? Or does it stay there? So very, very different. All methods for determining moisture content are based on evaporating moisture and measuring dry matter. Nope, it isn't. Again, there's many different methodologies for measuring water in foods. I can measure water in foods by gas chromatography. It's kind of overkill. I got an expensive instrument to go measuring water, but I can do it by gas chromatography. I can, from that matter, titrate it. So I think there's a titration, extraction with, oh well, I'll remember. Anyway, extraction of the solvent that picks up the moisture very nicely. When you can titrate that, you do a number of different methodologies. Moisture content is a good, accurate indicator of perishability. And not really. You again need to know whether that water is free water that can support microbial growth, for example, or is it free water that can protect something from lipid oxidation, for example. So moisture content doesn't tell you much. It tells you I can extract this much water out of it. It doesn't tell you how that water is bound, how it's tied up in food. So again, absolutely right. None of the choices. This was the second one. I think there's only two of them. Who wants to give an answer to this one? A and B, B and C, A and C, none of the above, all of the above, could be some of the above, maybe some of them. I think you should put in some maybes and could. Scientists don't like that. They like yes or no answers. Okay, who's going for an answer? Which one do you like best? Yep. I'll go for an opposite previous one, all of the above. Because it's an opposite? Good enough for me. Sure. But basically, you're absolutely right. All of the above are correct. There is a relationship between moisture content and water activity. There has to be. If you have no water, there's no water activity. If you have tons of water, guess what? You have tons of water activity. So no question. They're used to provide information about the moisture content, water activity, where you have the most stable conditions. Water activity is really important in determining the rates of some chemical reactions. Lipid oxidation is one of them. Maillard Browning is another one of those. So this is really important. And water activity can then be used to predict shelf life. So oftentimes we think about what influences the rate of a chemical reaction in foods. Water activity always enters into that equation, at least for consideration. Then, of course, you look at things like pH, temperature, storage, and so on that influence shelf life. So, yep, all of these are true. Have you guys studied water activity in this class or other classes yet? You have? Okay. Good. So, proximate analysis. What is the definition of moisture analysis? And so it may be fairly broad. We were talking, somebody just talks about a clear blue, not necessarily talking about proximate. They may come to you and say, I'd like some moisture analysis, water analysis, whatever. You say, really? What kind? Do you want to know total? Do you want to know water activity? What do you have in mind? So you have to be very specific because it can include both how much water is there and how free it is water. So it can limit the water content, like I say, or not. Depends on your purpose. When you talk about moisture analysis, someone comes in. Is it a label requirement? Or are you looking at product shelf or whatever? So the idea that the need determines methodology. And definition of moisture analysis, determining the water content. And so now this is a little bit broader in the sense. Somebody says moisture analysis to you, they may mean just the moisture content, or they may mean moisture content and water activity. You don't find water activity on your labels of products. You don't find them anywhere in the can or in the package. That's not what the consumer would appreciate, wouldn't know what to do with it. And so when we talk about a labeling purpose, then we're really only interested in extractable water, what can you recover from the system. But if somebody came in on a clear view and said, I want water analysis, moisture analysis, I'd say, narrow that down a little bit. What do you want it for? What's the difference between water activity, water content, and water activity? Well, we've kind of gone around that a little bit. But Dr. Ismail kind of laid them out here. Water content, moisture content, it's a total quantity of water that's not bound to the system. So it's what you can extract out one way or another. The material that's left is considered solids, so total solids. You extract the water, what you're left with is total solids. That's a mixture of salts, a mixture of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and fractions of all of these components. And so the idea of taking the moisture out of the food completely, it leaves you a total solids measurement. Expressed oftentimes as dry matter. And again, if somebody says, what is the moisture content? What is that on a wet basis or dry basis? So I'll throw a short in a moment. But you need to know what they're asking. Is the moisture content on wet or dry basis? Water activity defined as the partial vapor pressure of water in the atmosphere around the sample or above the sample. The vapor pressure of pure water at the same temperature ranges from, well, pure water is 1. No water is 0. So water activity goes from 0 to 1. No moisture in the above the sample to completely saturated. Well, let's say saturated. Let's say it's the same water activity as pure water would have. It's the amount of moisture in the air as pure water would have. Gives you a water activity of 1. It's like there's no food solids, no interaction in that sense. And this is an equation that's typically abbreviated as W, equilibrium relative humidity divided by 100. So it's basically you're doing the relative humidity of a sample at that temperature. And this says the battery's running low. So Let's see where we go. Nigel, how long will it run when the battery says it's running low? Well, we can put up for a vote if the class wants to wait and see, or you want to. I'm teasing, obviously. Well, Dr. Ismail, I'm sorry, we only had 9 minutes of class today. The battery ran out. She probably wouldn't buy that, would she? Sorry about that. That's not a problem. Should be great. Yep. Well, this was another one of Dr. Ismail's questions and say, why are we interested in moisture analysis? What are the things that are controlled by moisture content?
Microbes or like
Absolutely.
harmful.
Microbial growth, that's one of the ways we don't worry about dry products, do we? You know, if they need moisture, they need a minimum amount of moisture, water activity to do it. Yeah. You bet. What's the moisture content? What's the equilibrium? How does it migrate through the product? Some others.
Okay.
What is it? Shelf life? Absolutely. Strong indication or relationship between water activity and shelf life of a product. And that's interesting. Many food products have a sweet spot, you'd call it, where if it's too low, it's bad. If it's too high, it's bad. But there's a certain place where the chemical reactions, microbial growth, are minimized. And that's what you look for in terms of a shelf life. So very, very important. Anything else comes to mind?
Like flavor and infection. Your products. All each other.
Absolutely. Strongly influence sensory properties of a product. Customer may expect something crispy, but guess what? If it's soggy, that's not going to work for them. Too high a water activity. So these are some more answers that preservation, stability, what you've dealt with, the quality factor. Yep, if it's soggy, you're not very happy with that. If it's supposed to be soggy and spongy and it's crispy and crackly, you're not happy with that. The idea of she also brought in convenience in packaging and shipping. Is it a dilute product? And that's certain standards or needs for packaging that and shipping that, refrigerating and so on. If it's a concentrated product, different moisture content, right? The difference between a dilute and concentrated products, only the amount of water determines whether or not it's going to be stable. Feeding compositional standards or standards of identity. Some products, many products do have a standard of identity that includes this much moisture content has to be in that product to call it that particular product. And that certainly fits with many concentrated products. There's a standard of identity for moisture content. It's required for nutritional label calculations. What's your concentration of various nutrients? So the idea that the moisture content either dilutes that sample or dries that sample changes the amount of nutrients per unit weight of that product. Express results of other analytical determinations on a dry weight basis. Dr. Ismail likes a dry weight basis, expressing moisture on a dry weight basis. That gets rid of the variable of water being present. And so she feels really, agree with her, that it's easier to express composition if it's on a dry weight basis. And if you take this weight and eat it, you take this weight and analyze it, you know what you were getting in the process. So there's a good reason for doing moisture. It's, I suppose it's partially age, but at some point in life, you say, or I say, if you think it's easy, you clearly don't understand the problem. That's almost everything in life. And so the idea of moisture, water, H2O, my goodness, what problems could you have measuring something so simple? Well, there's a challenge in every set of analysis. And so the idea that we've got water over there. Structure of water, its movements to and from the environment. If you're if you're going to be determining moisture content on a sample, you need to have control of that sample from the time it's taken until you do your analysis. Why? Because it's left open to the atmosphere, could pick up moisture or could lose moisture. And so the idea, you're going to have good sample handling if you're going to be doing moisture content. Measuring water in all its states, solid, liquid, and gas. That's a challenge also, in the sense that water can be bound fairly strongly to some components of a fluid. They're not going to be easily recovered from a fluid. And so, again, being conscious of the methodology, how much bound to water there is and what it's bound to, helps you along these lines. The idea of water interaction with food ingredients, well, okay, there we go, bind water onto the food. Water is necessary for hydrolysis. And so your food, if there's an opportunity for an enzyme in there, and you're storing that food, and there's an enzyme in there that do hydrolysis, guess what? Your product's changing. It's being hydrolyzed. And so depends on how much water you have, whether or not an enzyme, for example, will do hydrolysis, or whether we'll get binding occurring. So it's certainly not an easy test to do. Need to minimize moisture losses, gains in sample collection, yes. So having control of that sample from the time it leaves the product until it gets into your lab and you're doing those analyses. So again, taking care of the samples. These are the methodologies that may be used for determining moisture content of foods. Basically, these two are looking at evaporation. So water that will evaporate, that's not bound so tightly that it can't be removed. You can have just a forced air oven, runs at atmospheric conditions. You have it heated up and you have a nice flow of dry air through it. You will, of course, evaporate water. In some cases, you might be using a vacuum oven. So you actually put a little more driving force there. Water is tightly bound. Oh, let me heat it and draw a vacuum. Now I'm really encouraging that water to go away. There's also microwave analyzers. So I don't know, I've done this in the microwave at home where you would get all your water from your food by accident. Oops. But you can do exactly the same thing. You can have a microwave oven, put your food in there, and instead of heating it by conventional methods, you microwave it. And okay, it loses the moisture. As long as you've got moisture, you'll get the microwave heating. There are rapid methods to do this as well. Thermal gravimetric. You can lyophilize or freeze dry. Do chemical desiccation, chemical determination, with Carl Fisher. These three are kind of the preferred methodologies, Carl Fisher and what you above. But it really depends on what you have in your lab and what your purposes are in doing these analyses. Those are all direct methods. You're taking the water out of the food. And so you can use any one of these methodologies. But you can also determine certain properties of the food. And dielectric capacitance, for example, least depends upon the amount of moisture. So we get a direct reading here too, by the ability to carry electricity. Hydrometer, in the case of hydrometer, you may have used that where you've got a little bulb in the old days. And you put it into a liquid, it displaces the liquid equal to its weight. So hydrometer, use that for testing antifreeze in the car, most commonly at home. Hydrometer. Pyknometer, refractometer, near infrared, freezing points, microwave absorption, positivity. There's again many methods. Some analyze properties that are influenced by water, and some actually measure water. So can go either of two ways. And we got what? 1, 2, 3. What, 20 minutes of methods, something like that. Different ways to measure water in food. The oven drying method is probably have you done this? I really should have looked at what you did. Okay, you've done moisture. And did you use vacuum oven? Did you use Carl Fisher? Do you remember?
You just do this little early heating process. There. There we go. That was just one thing. Yes. I think it was like a kind of substance. I think so. Yeah, there's a lot of things.
I'll look next time.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The other drawing like there, very, very popular. They're simple, the equipment is simple. You need a way really to heat the sample in a decent environment, dry movement, air through the system. And so you simply heat it, and then you need a balance, right? If you weigh it before, you evaporate the water by heating, and then you weigh the product again. So weight loss with the moisture content. And so put percent moisture, and that's on a wet basis. So it's the wet weight minus the dry weight. So that's the amount of water that was lost. Wet weight minus dry weight of the product, all over the wet weight. So it's what percent of your product is water, and that's moisture content on a wet basis. As I said, Dr. Ismail loves the alternative, and that's looking at moisture content on a dry basis. That really gives you the composition of the food, how much sugar, how much protein, how much other components. And so it kind of is an advantage. Standardizes it. If you've got products of different moisture, they all come out the same on a dry weight basis, assuming it's the same product. That's wet weight minus the dry weight divided by the dry weight. So I guess I was listening to her lecture from last year, and she said, you're going to have a product that's over 100% moisture. That made me listen. Wait a minute. You think you're going to have over 100% moisture in the product? You can on a dry weight basis, obviously, if you look at it. If your moisture content of the product is 102% moisture, I'm sorry, I'll get that one ready. If it's over 52, not 102, if it's over 52% moisture, when you do this determination, they'll have 48% here and 52% here. Right? Dry weight, wet weight. And so this actually 52% moisture would be over the 48, it'd be over 100% moisture. So if you ever are working with things on a dry weight basis and they say it's 100 some percent, don't be upset by it. Usually when something's over 100%, you kind of wonder about it. But no, it is possible on a dry weight basis. And then you're looking at the components that oftentimes we're most interested in, how much protein, how much sugar is present. And this is then getting into some of these methodologies, oven drying methodologies. You'll find that every product has a kind of a standard method to get moisture content. In some cases, you may have a sample where that has to be pre-dried. So pre-dried, maybe you're putting the product on a steam bath. If you're going to determine moisture content in milk, what would happen if you simply put it in the vacuum oven? Poof, right? As it heated, it would just boil all over. If it's even not under a vacuum, it may well be boiling over inside. So in some cases, particularly high moisture products, you're actually going to pre-dry it. Then you might put it on a steam bath until it gets rid of most of the moisture. And then you take it off the steam bath and you put it into a dry oven. So some products may need pretty drying. As you do this oven drying, we're talking about heating and what happens when you start heating foods. Basically, you get chemical reactions. Maillard reaction is a major chemical reaction. And so that will actually result in the loss of some components. And so you turn some of your food, some of your proteins and carbohydrates, particularly, into volatile components. And so you start losing weight. The longer you heat, the less that sample weighs. And so your heating has to be done for the right amount of time for that particular product too. So too much heat, that's bad too. Too much heat is certainly a problem, but can be a problem. And in some cases, water, your product may be undergoing some hydrolysis during that heating process. That takes water. You know, you split something, water molecule gets what ended up chemically bound across where that molecule was present. So again, you have to be aware that that heat treatment can give you some changes in moisture content. So again, you look for a methodology for a particular product and you see what's recommended. What's the methodology? What are the specifications for running the methodology? Because again, you may get undesirable changes, maybe overestimating moisture content or underestimating. Temperature control must be good. Those ovens that you put them in must be good. If they're not, you don't get accurate temperature control, you won't get accurate moisture determination. And oftentimes they do dry to a constant weight. And so that's again one approach. So you have good temperature control, then you take it to a certain weight. Pans and covers, there's some comment there. Some things may splatter as you put them in the oven, vacuum oven, they tend to splatter up. Not good if it's lost from that vessel. So there may be some kind of a cover on top of the vessel. And so you may have a place where you put your sample that may be covered with something, you may be covered with something that can get it. So again, when we think about splatter as a problem, I don't know if you've ever opened the oven and found, actually it's a really light fluffy powder. As you open the oven, the cold air rushes in and you just normalize your samples. Now a mixture of all your samples because of the dust or, you know, the product gets spread around. And so you can have problems along those lines. And so basically you do look at what the recommended method and you follow that recommended method. There's not one method meets all things. So again, read it when you are going to measure something, some food product, look for the exact methodology and follow that methodology. This is this one, which is preventing a surface crust. And so again, some foods may actually crust over. And in the process, it gets hard to get the moisture out of that crusty product. So it's again a number of problems that you have to be really conscious of. So on our oven drying methodologies, if it's a dry, you're probably going to go through some kind of a grinding. So you can standardize the particle size of that product that goes into the oven. We need to think about, are there volatile compounds present in that product? That will influence, it's going to lose them as well as lose moisture. You can think about temperature, thermal decomposition, lipid oxidation. You're actually adding oxygen to your fatty acids. It's increasing in weight. If a sample is very hygroscopic, there can be errors in the measurements. You simply take it out of the oven. You have to put it then in a desiccator. So take your sample out of the oven, put it in a desiccator so it's stored in a dry environment. And then we're hoping it's not a rainy monsoon season days. You take it from there over to the scale. It'll pick up moisture very quickly. So again, when they tell you to do something, you do. There's a good reason for all these procedures are outlined. So alteration, degradation of carbohydrates, surface crust formation, splattering on the pan, improper storage, not allowed to cool adequately before it goes in the ovens and so on. So again, a lot of opportunities for error. And like I say, you basically pay attention to how you're told to run the methodology for that specific product. What does proximate analysis include? Anybody want to offer these? Any of these? Let's start at the top one. Work our way down. What's included in proximate analysis? What materials are measured? Anything to add, subtract? What's the difference between moisture content and water activity? Who wants to have a go at that one? Sure. Basically, it's its ability to come to equilibrium between up and liquids and vapor. Sure. Measurement of vapors. What's the importance of moisture analysis? Why do we care?
It's important to know like how show.
Moisture content indicates its stability and shelf life. Absolutely. Methods for measuring it? That's pretty easy. What did we talk about? How many methods? You guys would get out here quicker if you answered quicker. I think we can run another hour if we need to.
Oven dry.
I'm trying my method. What method? Someone else was good. Sure. And again, many different methodologies. I don't know if you'll do Carl Fisher or not, but that's extraction with a solvent and then titration. That's very common in methodology. What are some considered errors for oven drying? How about just two of them? How's that? What two or two problems you have in oven drying? Then you're off the hook. Sure.
When we control the handling storage, because water is volatile. And you have to consider the interaction of water with other food ingredients.
Well, the components. Sounds good. With any luck, I'll see you Wednesday. Okay. Have a good afternoon.